So which Federal Reserve chairman over the last 40 years do you think has been most successful and might serve as a model for that appointment?
Alan Greenspan.
Since the founding of the Federal Reserve back under Woodrow Wilson, the Federal Reserve has struck out 3 times. They didn't stop the crash of 1929. They didn't stop the banking panic of 1932, 1933. And now they are the cause of the derivatives crisis because they're the ones who inflicted derivatives on the world with Alan Greenspan.
Mr. Cain, lots of independents, Tea Party supporters, libertarians, they're a little bit skeptical on the Federal Reserve Bank. Being the former Kansas City board president, if you were in a room just like this with independents or supporters who are a little bit weary on the Federal Reserve, what would you do to convince them that the Fed's policies are good for the country?
I would say that based upon my experience of being on the board of the Fed, that we can fix the Fed. We don't need to end the Fed. If you end the Fed, that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's like saying that because we have one airplane crash, we end the air traffic control system. You don't do that, you fix it. Now here's how we fix it. It has a dual mission, which it should not have. It has a dual mission of trying to use its policies to impact unemployment and monetary price stability. It really needs to just focus on monetary price stability, the way it did from 1913 all the way up to the year 2000. It got off track when the federal national debt hit $14 trillion and when foreign countries cooled off on buying our debt. When I was on the board of the Federal Reserve in the 90s, we always had foreign countries that would buy our debt in a heartbeat. Things have changed, so it has forced this Federal Reserve to come up with these so-called creative ways, which I don't agree with, which has damaged the value of the dollar. We need a strong dollar.
Congress created the Federal Reserve, yet it had no constitutional authority to do so. We forget that those powers not explicitly granted to the Congress by the Constitution are inherently denied to the Congress, and thus the authority to establish a central bank was never given.
One quick follow-up. You talked a lot about the Constitution today at your speech. Can you specifically mention where in the Constitution it states that a private central bank like the Fed can issue America's currency?
It's not in the Constitution. It is in the fact that the United States Congress commissioned the Federal Reserve. It is in that legislation where the Federal Reserve, where the United States Congress had the authority to commission the Federal Reserve. That's what they did.
Do you think it's right for them to print money out of thin air? Really, by them continuously printing the Federal Reserve note, it devalues the American currency. Do you think that's a wise plan for them to do?
No, that's not a wise plan to do. I don't agree with printing money out of thin air. I believe that if we had sound economic policy, they wouldn't be tempted to do that. What I mean by sound economic policy, it starts with making sure that you have policies that would grow this economy. These policies have not grown this economy. It's been anemic. This economy is on life support. Secondly, sound economic policy means don't run up the national debt from 10.4 trillion to 14.7 trillion in 2.5 years. All of that is part of sound economic policy. So let's make sure that we're working on the right problem.
The Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
Some people say that we ought to audit the Federal Reserve. Here's what I do know. The Federal Reserve already has so many internal audits, it's ridiculous. I don't know why people think we're going to learn this great amount of information by auditing the Federal Reserve. I think a lot of people are calling for this audit of the Federal Reserve because they don't know enough about it. There's no hidden secrets going on in the Federal Reserve to my knowledge. And I tell people, you know, we've got 12 Federal Reserve banks. You find out which district you're in, call them up and go from there. We don't need to waste money with another commission or an audit that's not necessary. Because, folks, we got a lot of other problems we need to worry about. You're listening to the Neil Bortz Show, and this is Herman Cain.
Since the Federal Reserve is the engine of inflation, creates the business cycle, produces our recessions and our depressions, the Federal Reserve obviously is a very important issue. And fortunately tonight we have a former director of the Federal Reserve at Kansas City. So I have a question for Mr. Cain. Mr. Cain, in the past you've been rather critical of any of us who would want to audit the Fed. You said you've used pretty strong terms that we were ignorant and that we didn't know what we were doing, and therefore there was no need for a Fed audit anyway, because if you had one you're not going to find out everything because everybody knows everything about the Fed. But now that we have found and we've gotten an audit, we have found out an awful lot on how special businesses get, bailed out. Wall Street, the banks, and special companies, foreign governments. And you said that you advised those of us who were concerned and you belittled, you say, call up the Federal Reserve and just ask them.